We are so excited to be coming to you by way of video today. We have got an awesome show prepared for you today. I kind of got to give you the backstory just briefly on this, because how we arrived at today is just only God could have made this happen. Betty and I both had a friend give us a book this last summer, and you know, I got to show it to you. I wish you could touch and feel this book. It's called The Turquoise Table, because one of the first things I told our friend that gave this to us is, you know, this is just the kind of book that you want sitting on your end table, because it's so decorative. It feels so good. It's just like a beautiful book, and that can hardly even prepare you for what's inside. We're talking about hospitality. We are talking with the author of this book today, Kristin Schell. She is joining us by way of video all the way from Austin, Texas. She's cracking up because I have a fire going behind me because I'm located here in Anchorage, Alaska. Betty's in Anchorage, Alaska, and then she's clear down in Austin and can't even fathom sitting in front of a fire today because she's enjoying the natural sunlight. So we thought that was pretty funny, but we want to give her all of the time that we can today. Welcome to Living Well, Kristin.
Thank you so much. What a delight to be here.
So I want to go ahead and just jump right in. We're going to ask you lots of questions, and we just hope to have an awesome conversation, just learning more about you and just kind of the backstory of this book and digging into the topics that you talk about here. I want you to start by sharing with us, in the very beginning of your book, you talk about this French immersion experience. And I think that kind of sets the foundation for this book. So take us back there and kind of how you even arrived at the beginnings of this book, The Turquoise Table.
Well, you know, when you get to a point in your life when you look back on it and all these little seeds that were planted long ago and all these opportunities start to make sense. And that's exactly what happened to me. So when I was a sophomore in high school, I flunked French. So basically this whole book started, I guess you could say, with a failure. I tried everything to speak French. It was mandatory in the classroom, and I tried tutors, and I tried, you know, my parents, bless their hearts, you know, tried all these things to help me try to learn French, and it just wasn't working. So finally, in a last-ditched effort, the school offered up an idea that I would go on a summer immersion program in France, which sounds like a dream right now, right? Like, I mean, that would just be a delight. But I was 15 years old. I had never been away. I was the child who tried to go to sleepaway camp and hated it and was homesick. And so, like, the thought of going to France didn't seem like a dream. It seemed really like a nightmare to me. And so off I went, you know, and it was actually the second night that I was there. I was staying with a French family, and my whole attitude, my whole heart, everything changed that day around the dinner table. So remember, I flunked French, so I obviously can't speak the language. And yet at this table, I felt so welcome. And here I was, a stranger, couldn't speak the language, didn't know what the food was. And yet for 2 hours, like, I was captivated by just the welcomeness of it. I felt like I belonged, even though everything was foreign to me. And so that was like one of those mile markers that we talk about sort of in our journeys or in our faith, that I was like, I wanted that. I wanted to be able to recreate, if you will, a table experience. I learned the value of conversation. Even if you can't understand it, I learned the value of just how important that connectivity time could be. And I learned what it was like to be welcomed as a stranger.
I have to.
Wow,
ask.
what an amazing experience.
Right. And I mean, I was so homesick, and I never got over that homesickness, but you know, it was just, everything. I mean, obviously it was wonderful. And so that failure, you know, really turned into the seed of my longing for hospitality and for cooking and for really just a life built around bringing people together over good food and conversation.
Can you speak French now?
Un petit peu. A little bit, you know, so.
So, Kristin, and then jumping a little bit further ahead, because it wasn't but a few pages later, you mentioned that a couple decades later, you found yourself struggling to get back to the table that you had kind of envisioned as you were having that experience. Tell us a little bit about that season of your life.
So yes, I mean, so I had that, and it was like this longing, this desire planted, and then life went on. I still had to go back to go to school, went to college, ended up, marrying Tony, and we have 4 children. And so life was not at all like, that summer in France, if you will. And as a mom with younger children, they're almost grown now, but at that time I was struggling. I was trying to figure out, how can I get my people to the table? How can, we recreate just a fraction of this dinner time experience? And I was failing again, miserably. I would try to make yummy dinners, or I would put the emphasis on food and not on the people. And I was struggling over and over. And I wasn't alone. I would talk to my friends, and we were realizing that schedules were busy, and there were good activities, but they were taking us away from the dinner time. I learned a statistic recently. Do y'all know what the average length of dinner time was in the United States in the late 60s, early 70s?
No, what was it?
It was 90 minutes. 90 minutes. I mean, that shocked me, and today, do you know what it is? Do you know what the average length of the family mealtime is?
Long enough to go through the drive-through.
Right. Exactly. It's 12 minutes, and so the interesting thing is, so we were kind of trapped between, that longing for, a 90-minute meal. And that's not practical. I'm not saying that that's what we need to do, but that's what I experienced. I would just settle for, 15 or 20, at this point in our lives. And so all of that longing was happening, but I couldn't figure out how to carve out the time to bring people back to the table without, just driving myself and the people around me nuts.
So then you talk about this house that you bought, and I don't know if it was in Texas or if you were in somewhere else, Kristin, but you talk about this house purchase, and it came with a set of expectations, if you will.
It did. So it's in Austin, Texas. This was the house that my husband and I bought, I think 15 years ago now. So we've been here a while. But when we purchased the house, how you sit and you have to sign a whole bunch of, documents and papers. And so Tony was kind of on pins and needles, just wanting to get through. Not a fun thing for, him to be signing away a mortgage, all these things. And so at the very last minute, the original homeowner who was sitting across the table, she throws in this request, and she says, "Here's the deal. I have a request that I really want you to honor." And so my husband's like going, "Oh my goodness, we're almost done. What could it be?" And I'm like, "What is it?" Of course, and he's kicking me under the table like, "No, stop." But she says she and her husband built the house. And so they were the second house in our little, area of town. And they were the second one. And they said, since the house was built, they've had the tradition of an annual Memorial Day party. So since really like 1967 or 1968, this Memorial Day party had been going on. And so she said, promise me that you will keep the tradition of the Memorial Day party going. And I looked at her and I was like, of course. I mean, first of all, it's February when we were signing the papers. And so I thought Memorial Day is so far away. And second of all, I was going to do anything to get that house. And so it was a rather flippant yes, if I can be honest. And then it wasn't until a few months later where I realized, oh my goodness, I made a promise. And so we did. We had that Memorial Day party, and it was super fun. I had lots of help with some of the other original homeowners to help tell us what had been done before and, what might work in the future. But here's what I noticed. I noticed after 2 or 3 years of this Memorial Day party, it was wonderful, super fun. We all came out, coolers and lawn chairs and grilling out in our cul-de-sac. And it was as if, as everything you could imagine with all the neighbors coming out. and enjoying company and just this fellowship. But then what happened was we would take our lawn chairs and our, wagons full of food back home, and the garage doors kind of would go back down and people would go back inside. And then we were sort of left a month or so later going, wait, I can't even remember, who their name, or, a year is a very long time to go between interaction with neighbors.
Honestly, in Alaska, Kristin, that's about the way it is. We say goodbye to our neighbors at the end of September.
Right.
And then we don't see them again till maybe April, maybe into March, April, because the snow begins to come and there's not a lot of activity outside.
Right.
So would you say that that experience of hosting that Memorial Day party, is that what then began to take you not only back to the table concept that you had found in your French immersion experience, but realizing that it was more of a neighborly opportunity as well?
Well, I wish I was that smart and it was that clear, but I'm not. God had a little bit more work to do in me, and the pieces just were still, not all coming together. And so there was another thing going on, really in my life too. And that is, it was a desire to, I've been involved in women's ministry for a really long time, and for 20 years have been part of an incredible Bible study. And I wanted my friends to come and enjoy that as well. And so every year when we would kick off the Bible study, I'd send out emails and invitations. And every year, I'd kind of wait in anticipation for people to join me. And it just never really happened. Sometimes they would come, or other times it was just a really nice response of that's, already I'm committed that morning. And so I started trying to think of other ways to maybe share my faith and bring my friends into the fold. And so I'd try to host a Bible study at the house. And, that was hard with kids and, doing it in the mornings or then in the evenings, trying to find another time. So it was like all these little things were converging. I had this desire, this longing in my heart to share what I was learning in my faith journey, right? I also realized that I really didn't know the people around me in the literal sense that the Great Commandment says, to love our neighbors. And I also realized too that our children were growing up in an era where they didn't know their neighbors. I grew up in a time where we were outside, playing until it was time, our tummies rumbled and it was time to come home for supper. And my kids weren't experiencing that. So all these little things were they were just little seeds in my head that I believe God was trying to teach and weave together for me. And I had kind of a little spiritual meltdown and a crisis, if you will, which is really where the answer came. So I was at a conference on discipleship, and it was here in Austin. And I heard an incredible speaker. Her name is Jo Saxton, and she speaks on women's leadership and discipleship. And so she was on the stage, and she spoke these words in the context of discipleship, but I believe that they work for all of us. And she says, you can't be what you can't see. And I love that. You can't be what you can't see. And so in that moment, I really did. I kind of melted down and I was like, God, I can't see it. I can't see how you want me to bring my neighbors together, to host Bible studies, to live out my calling, to share my faith. I have 4 kids, all these, I just can't see it. So show me. And then this beautiful documentary came on right after Jo left the stage. And it was kind of a time filler while they were setting up the stage for the next speaker. But it was a film by Dayadocs, which is a faith-based production company. And they put together a 5-minute video of this woman named Ludmila. And Ludmila is an 84-year-old widow in Prague, and the most atheistic part of the former Eastern Bloc. And as a recent widow, she began praying to God, what is it that you would have me do? How can I, best serve you? And through scripture, he reminded her that she was his ambassador to the kingdom of heaven. And so Ludmila did something that to this day sort of takes my breath away. She put a plaque, like a bronze plaque, on her brownstone, just, on her walk-up brownstone that says, Embassy of the Kingdom of Heaven. Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, can I put Embassy of the Kingdom of Heaven by my front, as an entrance to my door? And so I watched this film, and Ludmila practiced something that I had also never seen practiced. It's called the ministry of presence. Mm. And so for me, what God started doing was showing me, and as I had shaken my fist and said, show me, I can't be what I can't see. Ludmila was the very first visual that I had of someone practicing hospitality in a most simple way, like just by being present. And I had never thought of that because, I'm kind of one of those people, I'm a doer, I like to check off my lists. And so I, in the context of Ludmila's story, was really being like a human doer, where I saw Ludmila living as a human being. She was just being available, and people would come to her house and she would pray for them, or she would just listen. And so I thought, I've never seen that. I've never seen that. Ludmila was not consulting Pinterest. She was not worried about what she was serving folks. She was just being available. So I thought, wow, I have a lot to learn. I really have a lot to learn. So once again, instead of having all the answers, it raised more questions. And I went home and I was like, okay, Lord, what is it now that you're trying to teach me? Keep taking me on this journey. And that's when I really started learning through scripture what hospitality is, not through what the world says, because really what the world teaches us is entertainment. Mm-hmm. But I started diving into really what scripture tells us hospitality is, and they're vastly different. And I read the scripture that really has become sort of my life verse, and it continues to teach me, and it's Romans 12:13, which is the hospitality verse, if in where Peter is explaining about, Paul, is explaining about, offering hospitality. But I read it in The Voice, which is a translation, and it says, take every opportunity to open your life and home to others. And I thought, wow, I still have a lot to learn. That's what Ludmila was doing, but I still couldn't figure it out.
Kristin, I have to tell you that the Ludmila story is one of my favorite parts of your book. Oh. And we have used that. We found the video on YouTube, and we have used that several times, just in different situations. But the thing that impressed me about that was she didn't have a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And she just greeted people just the way she was, and she didn't turn anyone away. Right. To me, that is almost the essence of hospitality. She welcomed anybody that came to her door and shared whatever she had. Yes. And I love that she'd get up and she'd make biscuits, or she would make some kind of sweet, and she always shared whatever she had.
And it was so simple and so profound, and that was really what I had to learn was, do you trust me, meaning God, do you trust me with what I've provided to literally just show up? Mm-hmm. And I still have to learn that daily, but that, like to your point, is the essence of true hospitality.
I think in my book, I even wrote, I want to be a Ludmila.
Oh, me too. I was for a little while just obsessed with her because, like, on paper, she's in Prague. I'm in Austin. She's, at the time was in her mid 80s, and and I was in my mid 40s, and so we didn't have anything in common. And yet, God was so generous and so good to use her as an immediate answer to my prayer of showing me what I couldn't see. And to this day, I pray for her faithfully, and I would love to meet her someday. This side of heaven.
Stories to tell.
Yes.
So Kristin, you kind of spoke to this a little bit, and I love how you say that we've in essence, we've confused hospitality with entertaining. I want you to speak to that a little bit, because you have a headline on about page 16 of your book that says, when hospitality feels hard. What is it that we do that just overcomplicates it?
Well, I can only speak for myself, but I will tell you too that just in talking to women, around the country, there's a couple of things. One, it's the perfectionism thing, that it's like, well, if my house was only bigger, or if perhaps, I had a better backyard, or if my cabinets were, not falling apart, or if I had more time, or if I had more money, or when the children are bigger, or I don't know, in Alaska, what y'all might say, maybe when the snow thaws, here we say when it cools off and the mosquitoes go away. I mean, there's all kinds of things that if we wait for that perfection, and if we wait for that perfect moment, I mean, we're robbing ourselves of the joy. And, that's when hospitality begins to feel hard for me, is when I am putting sort of false expectations on myself. And that's when, though, I default back to entertainment. So entertainment, the root of entertainment is to entertain someone. So who does that make the star? That makes me the star. And so when I'm worried about my house, or my provision or my cooking ability, or all of those things, that is putting the focus on me, not on my guests. The Greek root of hospitality means love of strangers. And so that has nothing to do with perfection. It just means love these, strangers. And so I love beautiful things. I mean, this is not to say that we can't have, flowers or warm fireplaces, or, things that make us feel cozy and inviting and welcoming. I think the distinction, though, is our heart condition of this. And that if we allow ourselves to go down that entertainment, path, that's when we need the check. That's when we need the reality check of, okay, I'm putting Kristin on stage and she's worried about, whether her food's going to be good, when the guest just wants to be welcomed in and to know that they belong. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
I love the comment that you made in your book, and you just talked about the ministry of presence. The ministry of presence. I'd never thought about that. And it just kind of changed my way of thinking about what people want, or you.
They absolutely. Absolutely. And, and I, like I said, I had never heard of that either. And so when we think then of hospitality as loving strangers, well, sometimes I think we think so literally about who a stranger is. I mean, obviously it's someone we don't know, or they're a stranger. But I have been convicted and have learned, and I'm still trying to learn, quite frankly. There are times in my life when my own family members are strangers. And so when I am being called back into the ministry of presence with my husband, with one of the 4 children, or, so we can't just look at strangers and think, oh, I'm going to go meet somebody off the streets today. It can very much be people that we have not tended to, that we have not poured into, or invited enough into. And so that slows us down to this almost surreal space, or pace, not space, in our society. And it's hard. It's hard to practice the ministry of presence because we don't feel like we're doing anything, Like when you just sit and listen and hold someone's hand, like, doesn't feel like we're checking off our to-do list very much. But sometimes that's the very basic place we need to just begin.
It's kind of the productivity of what's intangible. That doesn't feel productive to us because we can't see it.
Right.
But I'm so glad you mentioned the ministry of presence really coming back to our own homes, Kristin, because you talk about this item in your book, and I want you to kind of tell us why you created it, but it's called the eye basket. Yeah. So I want you to kind of tell us about the morning that, your experience of kind of being consumed with some of the things and kind of how that was birthed.
Well, okay, yeah, this is not a fun story to tell because it was awful. I mean, literally, my children, it was just a regular busy morning, and all they wanted literally was some breakfast. And I was already on my computer. I was already doing all the things. And I was treating my kids worse than, quite frankly, I would a stranger probably. They were not getting my attention. And they did. They wanted breakfast and they wanted me. And the message I was giving them was, I'm already busy. This matters more to me, right now than you do. And it stopped me really just sort of dead in my tracks. And it was embarrassing, and I apologized later. And so out of that though came something good. We have what we call an I basket. So little I for like iDevice, any of your smartphones, any of the technology. And so I think it was a leftover Easter basket at the time. It was whatever. I mean, I was like, I saw the basket and was like, I'm throwing my device in there first. And it became the iBasket. And so even before the kids had, kind of were tethered to their devices, we had a rule. And y'all, this sounds so simple, but like, we have to practice it still. It's like no technology at the table, none. And that may sound like, well, of course not, but it is hard, because there's that temptation. Oh, the boss is calling, really quickly, or, oh, I just have to check this one thing on a deadline. I'll be right back. Or hold on just a minute, good things, but not at the dinner table, not at the dinner table. So we made that a pretty hard, fast rule. And we have been using the iBasket ever since, and it caught on. And so now if you were to walk into the entry of our house, there's the iBasket, and even the teenagers now, they know that, while they're here, it's the opportunity to, just go back face to face. I mean, why do you need to text or Snapchat your best friend when you're sitting right next to her, right? And so this, I get lots of eye rolls. Oh, Mrs. Schell, okay, here's her iBasket. But here's my thing. I believe that no iDevice, and I use that little I, that no iDevice will ever take the place of eye contact. And so that's one simple way we practice it at our house.
I recently saw this thing on Facebook, how they have all these little memes and things, but basically it said, hey, I'm having some people over later to come and look at their phones. Would you like to come?
I haven't seen that one yet. Yeah.
If that's not the truth.
I mean, right? It's like, hey, let's all get together and just stare at each other or take selfies and then post them for an hour. Like, because then the event happened, right?
Yeah.
Your kids are in the bedroom and they text you.
Right.
And you're in the kitchen or something. Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I'm in the thick of it. So I have 3 high schoolers now. And so, this is not an either or. It has to be a both and, because, technology is here to stay. Obviously, look at the beauty of it and the good of just what we're able to do right now, being able to connect the miles. And so I think that it's important, we don't want to throw technology under the bus necessarily, because there are amazing ways to keep families connected and good ways. But it's like the analogy and the differentiation between hospitality and entertainment. It's like, okay, social media can be used in ministry and for good, but there's a fine line, and how do we keep it in check, and how do we guard our hearts against what's too much? I mean, I'm an addict. Okay. I'll just tell you, I get on and it's a time suck. I'll be like, oh my gosh, I thought I was on for 2 minutes. And, it's been 20 or whatever. So I get it. But I think as long as we're mindful of that, and the iBasket helps. It helps me, if I'm honest.
Yeah, that is such a great idea. I just love that. And so many, I don't know any family that wouldn't be able to relate to that. So I appreciate you sharing that story. As we kind of move into part 2 of our show, Kristin, I want to really get to the turquoise table. So I don't know if there's anything else you need to share before you talk about that, but just move us right into how that first turquoise table was born.
So basically, I was a hot mess, right? Like I couldn't figure out anything. I, was busy. I was worried about technology. I didn't know my neighbors. I knew that I was supposed to be practicing hospitality, but had no clue. So God, in his infinite graciousness and knowing that I was going to need a little prodding, gave me what I believe is the ultimate in his creativity. I was having a barbecue, a backyard barbecue, and I needed an inexpensive way to seat more people. And so I asked Tony if I could have a little bit of a budget for some furniture. He, of course, said, nope, not $1. And so I figured, well, if I don't have $1, I can spend 99 on a picnic table. But it was the cheapest thing that I could get. And it was delivered from Lowe's. It's the ordinary picnic table, just the plain wooden one. And it came assembled, and it came delivered, and it came the next day. So it sort of checked all of the boxes I needed. But y'all, when they delivered the picnic table, first of all, it's heavy. And so the two delivery guys put it in our front yard, and they set it down right underneath this magnolia tree at the edge of our street. And I guess they came to ask me, because it's heavy, before they started moving it. So they rang the doorbell, came, up, and I walked out to see where, they had put the table. And it was an aha, take my breath away moment. And I mean, I saw that table there on the edge of our street underneath the tree, and it was like I knew that I wanted that table to be there. And, they asked me, is this where do you want it? And I just had this I want it right there moment. And they thought I was crazy. And, we moved it to the back for the party. But y'all, it was like this, all the things in my brain were firing off, and I couldn't wait for the party to be over so that I could put that picnic table back in the front yard. And we did. We had the party. It was great. But here's what I started thinking. What if we took that backyard barbecue, and what if, instead of having it in the backyard behind the big fence where it was private, what if we had it in our front yard? What if we had just a random pizza supper on paper plates, just a regular supper outside in our front yard? What if we did some of the art activities, the ones with glitter that I can't stand because glitter gets all over the house? What if we moved those out to the front yard? I started having this hypothesis of what if we were to live as front yard people. And it was like this epiphany. And I said it to my family. I asked my mom, I said, what do you think? Do you think this is crazy? I asked a couple neighbors. I said, what if we put this table out front and just started living life like Ludmila, more present, more visible, in just ordinary ways? And that's what we did. And I painted it turquoise because turquoise is my favorite color. And it rained for about a week, which I think was just generous of God for me to get my nerves up to actually go sit out at this bright picnic table. And so as soon as the rain cleared, I went outside, and the table's out there now. It's right next to the edge of my street, underneath this magnolia tree. It's turquoise. There's no escaping it. And I sat there, and I took a whole bunch of stuff with me because I was nervous. I didn't know. I mean, who sits in their front yard at a turquoise picnic table, right? And y'all, literally within minutes, a neighbor who I hadn't even seen her ever, not at the grocery store, not at the post office, not even I just had never even seen her. She walks by. Turns out she lives 3 doors from me. And Susan and I struck up a conversation, and 30 minutes later, we were exchanging information and okay, when can we get back together again? I'm so grateful that, we've met. And I took that as just a huge affirmation. Keep doing this. Try it one more time. Try it again. Try it again. And that's the very first experience I had.
So I have to share with you, Kristin, because right about as I'm reading your book this last summer, we decided to reward our youngest with this giant trampoline. And so we're putting this thing together in the front yard, and the intent was for it to go in the backyard. But I just kind of got to looking at that thing and I thought, is this really my turquoise table? I mean, really, a trampoline?
Yes.
But that thing stayed in the front yard all summer long. And I thought, I'll bet my neighbors think we are just crazy. But as the lawn chairs grew around the front and I'd have friends over and the kids were on the trampoline, so that kind of became my table experience this last summer.
I love that. But it invites curiosity, you know, and, you know, we can get into, you know, I'd love to know your experience, but when you're out front, you start to notice the rhythm, you know, every neighborhood. And this doesn't matter if it's snowing, you know, the majority of the year, every neighborhood has a rhythm. And obviously what's happening, you know, in Alaska isn't what's happening in Texas, but every neighborhood has a way, you know, to figure out that rhythm, that uniqueness of what would work. So trampolines in the summer, I love it. I think that's fantastic.
It was so awkward, but it really did the job. So it was fun.
Mildly awkward, but only for a little while, right? You know,
right.
Somebody has to go first, and
right.
and it can be a little mildly awkward. But you know, when you meet friends, then all of a sudden, you know how quickly that that awkwardness fades.
Yeah, well, it really did get you thinking about our culture. I mean, who decided that life has to take part all in the backyard and these boundaries of a fence versus out? Right. So it was just a whole mind shift on lifestyle. So it was very fun.
I love that. Love it.
Yeah. Did you have a question, Betty?
No.
Oh, okay. So you talk about how conversation leads to connection. I mean, that seems so simple, like we should realize that, but kind of walk us through what the Turquoise Table taught you about that.
Well, and this goes back a little bit to the technology and sort of the day and age in which we're living. And so I realized that the way I was communicating with people was changing. Right. And so like I was texting my friends more and more, less phone calls, more, you know, just quick condensed conversations. And I mean, to me, it wasn't fulfilling, you know, and I realized I was longing for, again, that conversation back like I experienced in France. But that's hard. That is so hard to find that time, because like if we were to pull out, you know, our iPhones right now and try to find a date, you know, when we could all get on the same calendar, like, you know, we all want to get together, but it's hard to find time. People are busy doing whatever. So I thought, well, how can we still create this, you know, this place for conversation? And so what the table has taught me is two things. One, when you have the permission to show up as you are in someone's front yard, like you can come, you know, straight from work in yoga pants, you know, no makeup, it doesn't matter. It's sort of this great unifier. Like if you're going to show up in someone's yard, like you don't have to worry about really what you're wearing. You're in a yard, right? And the second thing is that there's a whimsical nature, you know, when there's no planning or preparation. And so what happens is really when you're at a table and you're in the front yard, like all that's left really is conversation, right? Like what else are you going to do there? And so it has taught me that I don't need all the other things that sometimes I think I need, meaning food. Awesome. I love it. You know, I want to, you know, we love a good meal, but we don't have to have that. You know, if all we do is bring our own coffees or our own, you know, teas or water to the table, that's it. So there's this, it's a mindset of just come as you are, stay for as long as you can, leave when you need to. But these interactions sometimes are frequent and sometimes they're short. But rather than waiting for a monthly supper club or that annual, you know, annual Memorial Day block party, we're having small bursts of tiny conversations that over time really add up. And it's teaching us how to kind of push pause, but then pick right back up.
Well, and you know what I love about the outdoor idea of hosting is if you think about it, not only is it easier on us to not have to bring other people in, not to say we shouldn't challenge ourselves in that area too, but really it breaks down the barriers for new people coming in. If it's just outside, there's an easy exit. I don't know, it just kind of removes a lot of those pretenses for them as well.
It does. I like to call it the greatest hospitality hack, because really, and it's a baby step. It is a baby step because, and it's an easy, inviting, non-threatening way to have those first mildly awkward conversations before, you end up, inside. And so, yes, like, for example, where y'all live, clearly, it's not outdoor weather right now, but, in the summer when it is, if those foundations and if those conversations can take place, then it's easier, I think, to move inside. We have to move inside too. Even in Austin, Texas, we're not outdoors. We move inside in the summer when it's too hot. But it's easier. It's just easier to meet people and gives them the freedom, then when the invitation to come inside happens.
Yeah. And just for our Alaska viewers, I want to just throw this idea out there, just because this is one thought I've had, is a lot of us have fire pits and they're transportable. Bring that fire pit out to the driveway and just kind of see what happens for gathering people. So
can I tell you an embarrassing story though? So early on, okay, this may come as a shock, but we have, so many turquoise tables in Minnesota. Okay. I don't know what it is about Minnesota, but there are, just an inordinate amount of turquoise tables. And so early on, I was asked the question, well, what do we do when it snows? And so this will give y'all in Alaska, some context. I was like, no big deal. Just take one of your portable fireplaces and put it on top of the turquoise table and have s'mores or hot chocolate or whatever. And the woman was so generous and gracious. And she said, Kristin, our turquoise table is about 10 feet under right now. There's no plopping a, portable, fire pit on top of that turquoise table. And that's when I knew I was not going to speak for the Northern Hemisphere on things of that matter, So yes, I will defer to y'all on your judgment of how to combat winter.
Yeah.
Well, but I do know, that again, it doesn't matter where. It's that condition of the heart. And if the turquoise table is just a talisman or a reminder or an encouragement, then that's all it's meant to be.
Yeah.
Well, actually, we have started that in different women's homes at least through the winter. We've been inviting them in for conversation, but also for cooking. They've learned how to do different styles of cooking and sharing the meal, and then the hostess will give her testimony. So that has worked really well this winter.
That's beautiful.
We'll see what happens in summer. Do you know how many turquoise tables there are?
I don't. I know we're all in all 50 states and 8 countries. I know we have over 1,000. And the only way that I know if people have turquoise tables is, if they send us, a registration we have online. And the only reason we do that is because people are curious. They want to know where they might be able to go meet a neighbor or join up, in community. But then there are so many more that, we hear about just word of mouth, or, I'll get pinged on social media and I'll be like, wow, didn't even know they had one there.
So on that note, Kristin, I want to ask you, because in your book you talk about a few, but tell us just a few of the most unique tables that you've heard of and how women have kind of worked with their location and what they have to offer. Can you think of a few to share?
Oh, sure. And this is what I love. This is like my favorite part, because I think that it really speaks to just God's creativity and the uniqueness in all of the places that we call home. And so one of the things I mentioned earlier was just that every neighborhood, every community has a rhythm. And so the first thing, if someone's interested in doing this, is really just to slow down long enough to notice what that rhythm is. Where do people, naturally tend to gravitate? What are, those habits and not in a stalker way, obviously, but like, when it gets dark, do people, what does that look like in your community or neighborhood in the spring and the summer? Does it look, obviously, for y'all different than it does in the winter? Where do you go then in, the dead of winter when when you're not able to, to be outside? Where do people naturally tend to gather? And so when we lead that kind of conversation, people immediately come up with their own ideas, kind of like your trampoline. It's like, okay, I already had it. Let's just leave it here for a little bit. But people are putting turquoise tables in farmers markets in the summer, on school campuses. Libraries are loving this. In fact, one of the turquoise tables in Minnesota, they've put one in their community room in the library, because it's a warm, free, safe place, to go and grab a book, have a meeting space. Church patios and gathering spots. Hospitals. I was amazed at how many hospitals are putting them, as a place for patients and families to gather. We have 2 or 3 Ronald McDonald houses now that have the turquoise tables on playgrounds. Last week I was in Nashville, Tennessee at Vanderbilt University. Their Student Life Center has put a turquoise table out on their campus as a way for students who come from all over the United States to, have a place that feels welcoming, like they belong. So people are using just incredible creativity based on what works in their neighborhood and community.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I just think it's so important for women to hear just the different ways this concept can work, so that really we can remove every excuse for why we don't contribute and do this. So
I know. I mean, it's true. I think that, you nailed it, and you're so right with an excuse. And so I don't know. I've pretty much heard it all. I mean, like, well, I live on a ranch, or I live in, in a townhouse in an urban setting, or, there's lots of snow. And just through conversation and willingness, we have yet to come up with we haven't hit a stumbling block that we can't get over. So.
Yeah. So I want to read this one part of your book, and just to remind everybody, we are talking to Kristin Schell. We're talking about the Turquoise Table, her beautiful book here. And I'm going to read just real quick from page 97, Kristin, because I want you to speak to this just for a moment. You said, sometimes I don't feel anything happening, which in our instant gratification and quick fix society feels like failure. Building community, investing in the lives right in front of us requires us to take the long view. I love how you say that. Speak to that for just a moment on what is the long view in building community.
Well, I mean, and this is something that I still, have to remind myself of daily. Now, it's been 5 years since I put the turquoise table out, almost. So we're like 4 and 3/4 years. And so I've been through seasons, both, in weather, just the 4 seasons. I've been through then seasons in my life that have changed. We're getting ready to graduate, our oldest to go to college. But I've been through the seasons with neighbors and their lives changing too. And personally, I believe that these tiny moments, they add up. And so, for example, one night, my neighbor down the street, Monique, texted me, and we were both doing dishes. She's 4 doors down. She was going through a career change, and she's shared this publicly, so it's not like I'm tattling on my neighbor. I'm always so careful about the stories I tell about my neighbors. Anyway, she texted me. She was going through a career change, and she was like, I need table time. And table time is kind of code now for what we need. And so, I'm tired. She's tired. We're both doing dishes, right after dinner, kind of that crazy still hour. And so I was like, great, 15 minutes. And so we went outside. She walked up 3 or 4 houses. I went out, and we sat there, and it was only about 15 or 20 minutes. But she didn't need the answers. She needed someone to listen. She needed that ministry of presence. And I love that, because in the context of our busy, busy world, I would have thought, I've got to give her a solution. I need to come up with a new job plan. Maybe we can brainstorm or strategize how she can, work out the next 5 years. Like, all she needed was in that moment, someone to say, this is hard. I don't know what's next. I don't know what's going to happen. And let me tell you what happened in that just short term, because I think this is the way God just delights us. One of our original homeowners who lives down the street passed by. Now, he's in his mid-80s, and he was driving by, and he saw us sitting outside at the Turquoise Table. And he said, how long are y'all going to be there? And we said, oh, just a few more minutes. Bob, do you want to join us? And he said, nope, but don't move. So Monique and I were like, okay, well, when, Mr. Gary says don't move, we won't move. So we were still talking and, and continuing our conversation. And he came back like 5 minutes later with warm sugar cookies from the drive-thru at McDonald's for us. And he brought us these warm sugar cookies and he said, this is what it means to be in community. And this is what it means to be a good neighbor. And y'all are the next generation and you're doing it.
Oh.
And we wept. We were like, we were hot messes after that. But the point is that, Mr. Gary could see, and probably had fears and worries about the next generation of, what our neighborhoods might look like. And he affirmed us in what we thought was a throwaway, insignificant minute, really. We were not out there more than 20 minutes total, or maybe even 15. And yet those little moments add up. And over the long haul, that was probably 2 years ago. Monique has a new job. She's doing fantastic. And so that's what I mean. Like, when we're available and when we say yes, sure, it was inconvenient. I would have rather gone upstairs and crawled in bed. So would have she, but those little moments of being both host and guest, like we both had to play host a little, we both had to play guest a little, and showing up for one another, it matters. It matters. And then they just keep feeding off of each other.
That's an incredible story, an incredible testimony.
It is. And what I'm kind of reminded of is early on in your book, you talk about how we live in probably the most connected era. Well, we do. We do. But yet we crave community. And that older man in your neighborhood, that's what he knew is the background of his culture is, they truly were having community with one another. So I think it's interesting that we're so connected, yet lack that community.
Right.
We're so connected, but yet we're not.
Right. And I just think, back just to that tiny little moment, because we all can have those moments. Think about it. We didn't show up with anything. I know, neither Monique nor I brought anything to the table that night. She acted on an urge. She thought maybe I might be available. I said yes. I mean, like, all of these are just like really simple things. Bob Gary didn't have to go to McDonald's, but he did. Like all of those things in and of themselves just represent the opportunity that I know exists for all of us. We just have to slow down and have eyes to see and a heart willing to say, okay, whatever that moment looks like, I'm going to show up for it.
Yeah.
I think one of the words you used, available.
Yes.
We have to be willing to be available.
And that does take margin, and it takes intentionality. It really does. I mean, and I still fight this. We all do. Because we have to give up something, to be available. But the risk the risk we run. That was hard to say. The risk we run if we don't, is I think profound. And I think that we can't control what's going on in our world and in our nation and in so many 30,000 foot level, areas that I say, but we can make a difference in our communities and our one block, we can.
I want to ask you this question, Kristin, and we're almost out of time, and I wish I would have asked it earlier, but I think you kind of speak to this in your book. I honestly can't recall, but is everybody that you meet at your table like-minded? Do you know that everybody attends church, that you have the same family values? Kind of take us there for a minute at how you still connect at this table with or without those things in common.
Yeah, no, it's very different. And that is one of the things that I love the most. So kind of back early on when, my heart's desire was to bring people, into a Bible study. Well, how naive and short-sighted of me to just assume that people would just want to come. They would just want to come to Bible study. I'm learning a lot, and the answer that God has given me was, if they're not ready to come to church, well, then go to them, which is really what we're called to do, And so I thought I'd go far and wide on mission. Never in a million years did I think that the front yard would become my mission field. And so I would say, maybe 50-50. I've never put a number on it because my neighbors aren't a project, and they're not people that I'm trying to, to convert, if you will. But no, I would say the majority don't have maybe a church home or a church home like, maybe like where I am. I've learned so much. I've learned so much about how religion has gotten in the way of a lot of, that people are burned by the church. They've had bad experiences with religion. And so over time and with trust and with great, delicacy and compassion, I'm able to share really Jesus and not so much religion. And those have been the moments that have been so incredible, but it doesn't start there. It really doesn't. And we have the hard conversations. All you have to do is open up the front page of the newspaper. And I believe that the conversations about whatever we're reading in the news and the things that are affecting our world, maybe Twitter and Facebook aren't the best places to have those conversations. And we're tackling them at the table, racial, reconciliation, the Me Too movement, gun laws and gun, all of these things are happening. And so rather than take a more public platform, what if we have those conversations with people we know and trust, and with very diverse views, and a lot of them, but have those conversations there, and then maybe, have a broader view to take them elsewhere, if called, but that's been one of the most beautiful things, is learning about different backgrounds and religions and cultures at my own table, like right here.
I'm so glad we were able to end on that note, because I think that can be one of the biggest barriers is what if, we don't share the same values and now we're conversating. So I'm glad that you kind of spoke to that to remove that barrier.
Yes.
And Kristin, I love all of your what if statements.
Yeah.
They're encouraging, they're challenging, but very good. Very good.
Well,
and also, I hear a new hashtag if you're not using it already, but I love the hashtag tackled at the table. I mean, what an awesome concept.
Oh, I love that. I love that. There you go. That's great. Tackled at the table. I love that.
Write that down.
I would, yeah.
As we're coming to an end, Kristin, is there anything else you would like to share or add, or could you just, briefly kind of tell our followers where they can find this book? We're going to provide links and so forth, but if you could just share real quick where to find you, that would be great. Well,
the turquoisetable.com is the easiest place. And actually, if you just Google turquoise and lady, I'm the one that shows up, so turquoise is it. And, the book is really, it kind of gives all of, hopefully encouragement and simple ways to start. But, like I said, I've been almost now 5 years into it. And so we're continuing the conversation with a podcast that launches in 2 weeks. And so it'll air every other week. It's the Turquoise Table podcast. It'll be on iTunes. And really it's just to tackle these, issues at the table. And so we have guests, and I always provide conversation starters in these. And so it's just an easy way for people all over, just to kind of chime in and get an extra dose of encouragement and to find out, what's working again, in different areas around the country, because certainly there'll be an idea that sparks something, maybe in, Minnesota or someplace. Wyoming too. Wyoming was the last state. Alaska was not the last state. Wyoming was the last state to get a turquoise table. So I know, right?
I feel privileged that Alaska's even on there.
I do too. Thanks to y'all. So.
Well, we want to thank everybody for joining us today. Well, we were so blessed to be conversating with Kristin Schell. Again, her book, The Turquoise Table, beautiful book. We will provide links on how you can get that. Kristin, you have set the bar super high for me, because being able to talk with the author of a book I've read has, what a treat. But that's a new standard.
Oh, goodness. Well, it's funny because I like to say that I keep the bar really low because, because it's like, how hard can it be? It's a picnic table. So keep that bar low, though.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Kristin, for joining us here on Living Well. It's just been a real pleasure to talk with you.
Well, it is my honor. Thank you. Thank you both.